couple of things to add about resting. It is very much a cumulative practice over time. So our ability to deepen into resting really changes with practice, basically. When Scott first started talking about resting, I misunderstood and thought that he meant relaxation. And my system was definitely not going to relax. So it took me a while to understand that resting was this very, very simple being with and becoming aware of what's here. And whilst we were doing that, we had a question in the chat room, which I think is a really great one to address now. Basically, how do we rest with intense feelings? How do we rest with terror or feeling suffocated or overwhelmed or overpowered? And this for me is really where the living inquiries come into their own, because sometimes, as we know, it simply feels impossible to rest with what's here. So much stuff going on in the mind, thoughts and imagery, so much intensity in the body. So I think now's a good time to start talking about the inquiries and how they dovetail into rest. Scott, do you want to start the ball rolling with that, and then we can come on in?
Yeah. Inquiries, when I first developed the unfindable inquiry, it was like two or threefold. Like, one was that I didn't have any tool to help me see the deeper core strand of the self-identity, which was the deficiency story. So feelings were coming up and woundedness was coming up, but I couldn't pinpoint the source of it or what it was really centered around until I, used that boomerang to say, what is he reflecting back, or what is she reflecting back? And then it was like, oh, I'm unlovable. And then, so then how can I look at this? Because before that, it seemed to be about him or her. And I was blinded. I didn't realize it was because of something that I believed about myself. So one way was to target that, but then and to target to see what it is that I was believing when I was feeling those moments of being wounded. And then, so asking the question, like, is this picture you, the one who's unlovable? The rest had to be built into it because there is this sense of, well, I guess one way of saying it is there was like a clinging to that identity or a pushing away of that phenomena, So the rest was a way of, like Lisa said, of like reorienting my central nervous system to allow these things to be, which is almost the last thing I wanted to do. The feeling of woundedness would not be something that I just simply want to allow. So the rest has to be built into the looking. So I guess that's the second part. The rest has to be built into the looking. Otherwise, the tool might become a way of trying to get rid of things. And the third thing is that, in a sense, the inquiries for me are a bit of a trick to get people embodied, because what we're simply saying is, when we say, is this threat, are these words a threat, or is this picture a command to drink, or is this picture you? Those are the inquiries. What we're really saying is there a feeling or sensation connected to them? And so it's a way of getting folks to see that, yeah, there is. And this is not something that I've rested with before. I've been in my head. So now can I come down and feel that and then be with that in a restful way, which is, again, one of the last things we want to do at that level. But the more that we get down into the body and rest with and allow, of course, that's when all the stuff starts to unravel and we start feeling more comfortable in our own skin. And, so that's rest. In some ways, they're all synonymous. That we talk about natural rest or presence or awareness, and we talk about inquiry, but for me, it's all just one sort of way of being with life and phenomena. We just put words on it to talk about how it's different, but really it's all the same for me.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to chip in here? Lisa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to just bring back some ideas from earlier of weakness as well as the nervous system. I think there's an idea that people have that they should be able to rest with anything. And especially when starting out, it's really challenging to rest on one's own sometimes. And then there can be a judgment of self, like, oh, I can't rest with this, and it just can kind of refuel the deficiency stories, as Scott alluded to earlier, in a different kind of way. But yeah, so without that self-compassion that sometimes can come from being supported by somebody else, it can be challenging. And I think for me, I didn't get a sense of how to rest with terror, for example, or challenging sensations until I had been with somebody who held the space for me to let it all out, to really let the terror be seen by another individual and be held and with compassion and love. And it's something in my nervous system then took that in at a deep level to know that there was something safe about resting with intensity, something safe about resting with terror, so that it didn't become so formidable. So everyone has their own ways of doing that, but I just can come back to the nervous system over and over, that our nervous systems really need to feel safe, to feel. And so whatever that is, whether it's support from another person, whether it's a really warm bath to help your system come fully online, whether it's going for a walk or being in fresh air, to really get your system more online and able to support the underlying deficiency stories and what will arise with them, which might be terror. I know somebody asked about terror, so that's why I keep mentioning terror. And to be honest, terror for me was a huge wall, but also immense freedom was behind that wall once I was able to meet terror. So I'm a huge fan of meeting terror, even though nobody effing wants to meet terror. So there's like that push and pull. But again, once the nervous system feels that sense of safety and knows that it will not bring permanent death, maybe just temporary energetic death or an ego death, so to speak. But there is a way through. It's the way through, right? I'm sorry, the reason I brought up weakness is just that to get the support that you need so that that sense of having to do it by oneself or having to do it by, it just doesn't work that way sometimes. We're an interrelated species, and we are designed to have support from other people. So utilizing those resources is important.
Yeah, any other thoughts on that? Anybody else on the panel?
Can't hear you, Helena.
Yeah, Helena, you're muted.
Back up, rewind.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, my experience of rest was that it really took me quite a while to learn how to do it. It really wasn't until I was training as a facilitator that I began to realize that I didn't want to go into my body because it just felt so tense all the time. But I was training, so I was doing several sessions a week and being taken into rest several times. So gradually I began to realize that it was about letting myself be okay with not feeling okay in my body while I was resting, feeling the anxiety, which was astonishing to feel. No wonder I didn't want to feel it. And gradually, over months and months and months, it began to drop down. And there was a point I crossed, like a line, that was like, okay, this is actually just my nervous system firing off. It's just muscles contracting and heart beating and sweating and going numb and all of that. And it was kind of just, it was something like, oh yeah, this is physiology happening. And by then I was starting to understand, yeah, okay, words and pictures have set this off. And if I can see that those aren't actually a danger right now, then what's happening here is just a reaction pattern that I can just sit with and allow it to gradually ebb away. And the chemistry might take half an hour to cool down, but it will. So that was the turning point for me with rest.
Yeah, I had quite a similar experience, and I see that with working with people as well as in myself all the time, that we're so convinced that going inwards is going to be a really bad move. As Lisa was saying, that it can take a while to really start to experience the safety of doing that. And now it feels very natural to go inwards. You know, in the past that would have felt entirely unnatural and really quite a mad thing to do. But when you start to realize what insight and realization and wisdom and intelligence can be found in that, all of these responses we're having, even though they feel really awful, have their own wisdom. I think when we really start to get that, then we become much more willing to look, even if it does feel uncomfortable.
I love that you shared that, Fiona, because that is so my experience, and I even use that language that, you know, resistance or the clinging or the holding or the pushing, that has wisdom in it. You know, we may not know what it is or why, but if we can, so to speak, turn our hands, or take our hands off the wheel and let it rip, let the pushing push. It's not easy to do that in the beginning. In fact, it's nearly impossible. But again, there's a repeating theme here, you know, there's a practice that one develops. And then the readiness and willingness just come with that practice, so that the pushing is really allowed to push and to tap into its own sense of innate wisdom that's apart from our you know, our right brain linear knowing. Yeah.
And, you know, one other thing about that's where working with somebody can be helpful, because I was just thinking as the stomach thing was a scary area for me. So I could, you know, I kind of had shifts in my heart and my throat area, and it just felt very natural to kind of feel down in there. And then down in the stomach was like, oh, no, I can't go there. And, you know, frankly, I needed like some skill or someone who had skill to take me down there, and because I couldn't see the wisdom at first. At first it was just like, this is too much. Like, this feels very uncomfortable. But then asking certain questions, either I was asking them or somebody was asking them to me. And then I found out, well, there's a world of stuff down there around shame, around fear, main issues. And then being able to tweak that stuff out, right? And see what's the difference between a sexual urge and a sexual urge wrapped in fear and shame. Well, there's a universe of difference. But until I can tweak it out and see where are the stories connected to shame, where are the stories connected to trauma and fear, and can they just be allowed and kind of filter out, then and then there's still a sexual drive. You know, I'm talking about my sex addiction. It's still there, but it's not wrapped up into these little things. And that's when I think the body starts to open, when we become open. So, you know, just to reiterate, one theme is that it is difficult at first to do this, but working with somebody can be very helpful because and the other thing is if you're not working with somebody, it can be very frustrating, because if it's difficult to be with something and you don't have the skill on your own to work with it, then you might just simply turn away from the resting out of survival. But somebody can help you with that if you're at that place.